Okay, I want to begin by thanking the organizers for the invitation and for their hard work. Those of us who've organized conferences before know how difficult it can be at times. So thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here among friends, colleagues, those people interested in the study of social movements, and in particular the politics of resistance as it pertains to contemporary Iran. The topic that I was given was the clerical divide in Iran, and I'm very happy to share with you some scattered comments on the topic. I'm very interested in the relationship between religion and politics generally, historically, comparatively, but particularly with respect to political developments in the Muslim world. And what I propose to do over the next 20-25 minutes is to just give you a brief overview of the clerical divide, focusing really on the views of dissenting clerics, those who have been critical of the regime in recent months. And then I want to spend the bulk of the time talking about, why this actually matters, why it matters for the struggle for democracy in Iran. And then at the end, I want to make just a brief ending comment by providing you a dissenting point of view that will hopefully challenge and give us something to think about in terms of how significant this clerical divide actually is in the short term in terms of the struggle for democracy. Now, according to one estimate, Iran's clerical establishment consists of about 200,000 members, and its hierarchy includes thousands of middle-level clerics, known as Hujjatul Islams, and hundreds of ayatollahs who are religious leaders recognized by virtue of their scholarship. Ranking above the level of an ayatollah is an exclusive category of about 15 to 20 grand ayatollahs, who are revered as sources of emulation and religious authority, and are viewed as religious guides by the pious Muslim Shia community by virtue of their erudition and their scholarship and really the size of the followers that they have been able to gather over the years. Now, Mohsen Kadivar, who is a prominent reformist cleric, public intellectual, and scholar, and who has given a lot of thought to this question of the clerical divide, has provided a threefold breakdown of the different types of Islam and clerics who have been active in Iran over the last 100 years. Category number one is a group of silent or apolitical clerics who have a traditionalist worldview. They're very popular in the seminaries and argue if one had to do a number count, they would form the largest constituency. And number two, the second category really breaks down into two different categories of politicized Islamic clerics that Kadivar describes. One, those who have been formally affiliated with or in political power in Iran over the last 30 years. He describes this group as those who are characterized by an authoritarian mindset, coercive and violent Islam is how he describes them. And then there's a second category, also of politicized clerics, but who have adopted a much more tolerant, truth-seeking, and humanistic interpretation of Islam. Those are adjectives that Kadivar has given to this third category. One of the interesting developments after the June 2000 election has been an open clerical dispute and clash between supporters of Ahmadinejad and the ruling regime and those in opposition. In other words, between these two different types of politicized forms of Islam. Before jumping to the conclusion that there is a full-scale revolt of the clerics in Iran that is going to bring down the clerical and ruling establishment in the short term, I just want to emphasize the point that I think Kadivar has made accurately, that the largest community of clerics really are those who are characterized by a sense of an apolitical approach to society. Now, how to interpret the fact that most of the clerics are apolitical, and also those who in the past may have registered in a political opinion have really been silent over the last 8 months? Is that silence to be interpreted as support for the regime, opposition, indifference? Views differ. The range of responses that have been on public display in Iran since the elections and the street protests vary from strong support for Ahmadinejad and the ruling establishment and an attack on the protesters in the Green Movement to the converse, strong criticism of the regime, ruling elites, and the violence that has been meted out against the protesters. And number three, there's a third category of calls for compromise, negotiation, dialogue between both camps, and subtle statements of discontent and advice about the dangers to the Islamic Republic if the current crisis is not resolved amicably among the children of the revolution. There has been a very wide-ranging debate, often heated exchanges and comments by many clerics about the election itself and the crisis that has enveloped Iran over the last 8 months. I want to share with you just a brief sampling of a few statements and comments of some of the most senior clerics, in particular the views of the Grand Ayatollahs. To the extent that these views are representative of broad opinion within Iran's religious seminaries and the country at large, would seem to suggest significant discontent about the contemporary status quo in Iran, coming from this important class of actors with huge implications for the stability of the regime and the future of the Islamic Republic in the years to come. Now, those who've been following Iran will know that the most prominent and distinguished clerical voice of opposition over the last 8 months has been Grand Ayatollah Hossein Ali Montazeri, who recently passed away. He's been described as the moral conscience of the Green Movement. I've described him as a Desmond Tutu-like figure for Iranian politics. He was one time the designated successor of Khomeini, spent his life opposing dictatorship both before the revolution and afterwards, with long times of his life spent in jail and internal exile. He's been the most outspoken and a senior cleric who has been critical of established power in Iran since the revolution. In 1988, he famously broke with the regime over its human rights violations, prison massacres. He gave a very famous speech in 1997 directly attacking the supreme leader over his weak religious credentials, but more importantly, condemning the emergence of widespread political despotism, tyranny, the abuse of power, and calls for greater democratization with Iran. In Iran, he spent 5 years under house arrest after that speech, where he continued to give interviews, statements of defiance that were very much welcomed by the reform movement. After the 2009 election, despite his age and his frail health, he issued some of the most powerful and damning critiques of the ruling clerical oligarchy. Not a week would go by, and I was following his statements quite closely. In the last 6 months of his life, not a week would go by without him issuing some statement, interview that was fiercely critical of the treatment of the opposition, of the election itself, of the bastardization of Islam. That's my term, but he was very much of that view. He backed the opposition's claims of electoral fraud, stating that, quote, no one in their right mind can believe that the ballots were fairly counted, and he even issued a fatwa declaring Mahmoud Ahmadinejad's government to be illegitimate, just as it was once said of the Holy Roman Empire that it was neither holy nor Roman. Montazeri famously remarked that the Islamic Republic today is neither Islamic nor a republic. In a widely reported fatwa in July of 2009, he called Iran's rulers usurpers and transgressors who have lost all legitimacy to rule. This was a historic statement that was widely circulated among opposition groups and sullied by Iranian democratic forces, but it was suppressed within Iran and not reported by the official state news agencies. The most bold and courageous part of this statement was that Montazeri explicitly affirmed that all believing Muslims had a moral and religious obligation to oppose the current rulers in Iran and to seek their replacement, albeit through nonviolent means. In his own words, quote, people must express their opinion about the illegitimacy of Iran's current rulers and the lack of their approval of their performance, and seek their dismissal through the best and the least harmful way. It is clear that the dismissal of regime officials is a societal duty of everyone and all the people, regardless of their social positions, and according to their knowledge and capability, must participate in this endeavor, and no one can shirk their responsibility, end quote. The second senior Grand Ayatollah, Ayatollah Yusuf Sonei, was a close confidant of Ayatollah Khomeini, widely known in Iran, especially among feminist groups, for his progressive rulings on gender issues and his opposition to the development of nuclear weapons, stating that it's self-evident in Islam that these weapons should be prohibited. With regard to the disputed election, he has called Ahmadinejad as an illegitimate usurper president,